Snow blew sideways through the broken gate. A small woman dropped to one knee on the stone floor of the great hall. Her hood fell back. Her hair was wet. Her lips were blue. Strapped against her chest in a strip of gray fur were two tiny bundles, and one of them whimpered. The guards drew their blades. The court froze. She lifted her chin. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Of course nothing came out. 3 winters ago, they had cut the sound from her throat. The hall held its breath, because every man and woman in that room remembered the night they sent this woman to the cliffs to die. Her name was Wren, and the babies in her arms were not supposed to exist. So why was she here at the throne on her knees alive? Stay with me on this one. This story turns hard. Wren did not look up at the throne. She did not look at the guards. She did not look at the long line of nobles in their silver collars staring at her like she was a ghost climbing out of a grave. She looked at the floor in front of her knees. She kept her chin tucked. She breathed slow. She had walked 9 days through the mountains for this moment, and she was not going to ruin it by shaking. The fur sling against her chest moved. One of the pups made a soft sound. Wren pressed a flat palm against the bundle. The pup quieted. Behind her, the doors slammed shut against the storm. The bolt dropped. The cold stayed in the hall anyway. Cold lived in this hall. Cold lived in the stone. It had lived in her bones for 3 years. To her right, a steward in a long fur cloak cleared his throat. He stepped forward. His boots clicked. He looked down at her like a man inspecting a dead rat. He lifted one gloved hand. He said her name out loud slowly, the way you say a curse word in front of children. She did not answer. She could not answer. He knew that. Everyone in the hall knew that. The steward looked up at the throne and asked permission to remove her. From the throne, no answer. Wren heard the silence the way you hear a held breath. She heard the steward shift his weight. She heard the small wet click of a pup's mouth opening for air. She heard the wind clawing the windows. And then she heard boots on stone. Not the steward's. Heavier. Slower. Coming down. 1 step. 2 steps. 3. The king was coming off the throne. The whole court inhaled at once. Wren did not lift her head. She did not need to lift her head to see him in her mind. She had seen him every night in the cliffs for 3 winters. Tall. Black hair cut short for the field. A jaw like a stone shelf. Eyes the color of wet slate. A scar from the left ear into the beard. A man who had once put his hand against her cheek and called her his. A man who had once stood at the high table and signed the order that cut her tongue and threw her out into the snow. Both of those men were the same man. Both of those men were Kale. The Alpha King. Her mate. The man who had stopped being either. The boots stopped at the bottom of the dais. 2 long strides from her knees. Wren felt his shadow fall across her hands. She did not move. She heard him breathe in once through his nose, slow, the way a wolf checks a scent. He went still. He knew. She did not have to look up. She did not have to make a sound. He knew the scent of his own pups. The hall did not know that yet. The hall thought she had crawled back to beg for mercy. The hall was wrong. Wren had not come for mercy. Wren had come for the truth. And she had carried it 9 days through snow, 2 babies on her chest, to lay it at his feet. A noblewoman near the front laughed. It was a short, careful laugh, the kind of laugh that is supposed to start other laughs. No one joined her. The laugh died alone. Wren knew that laugh. She would have known that laugh in a thunderstorm. It belonged to Lady Sable, the king's sister, the woman who had stood at the high table 3 winters ago and pointed a finger at Wren and said the word that started everything. Traitor. The same throat that had said the word now made the laugh. Wren felt her hands curl into the fur of the sling. The pup stirred. She forced her hands open. Not now. Above her, the king had not moved. He was still standing 2 strides away. He still had not spoken. Wren waited. Every breath in the hall waited. Finally the king spoke, and his voice was low and rough, the voice of a man waking up from a long bad dream. He asked her one question. He asked who the father was. The hall gasped. Of course the hall gasped. To ask that question in public was to admit the pups could be his. To ask that question was to admit that 3 years ago he might have been wrong. Lady Sable stepped forward fast. She started to say something. The king held up one hand without turning his head. Sable shut her mouth. Wren could not answer with words. She had no words. So she did the next best thing. She loosened the sling. She took the first pup out. A boy. Black hair already thick. She held him up, 2 hands under his small body, the way you offer a sword to a king. The pup blinked in the torchlight. His eyes were wet slate. The same eyes as the man standing over her. The hall made a sound like a sheet of ice cracking. Wren reached into the sling again. She took the second pup out. A girl. Same black hair. Same wet slate eyes. Same scar pattern on the left brow that every firstborn of the king's bloodline had been born with for 11 generations. She held the girl up too. Now there were 2 pups in her hands and a king 2 strides away, and a court of nobles all looking at the same face on 3 different bodies. Lady Sable stepped forward again. She said it was a trick. She said the pups had been stolen from somewhere. She said the mute woman was a known liar. The king turned his head. Slow. Just his head. He looked at his sister the way a man looks at a snake on his pillow. Sable stopped talking. The king turned his head back. He looked down at Wren. He looked at the pups. He looked at Wren again. Then he did something no one in that hall had ever seen him do. He went down on one knee in front of her. The Alpha King of the Lycan court knelt to banished mute Omega in front of his entire court. The hall made no sound at all. Even the wind seemed to pause. Wren did not move. She kept holding the pups up. Her arms were starting to shake, but not from fear. From 3 years of cold. Kale reached out. He took the boy first. He cradled the boy against his chest, one huge hand under the small head. The boy did not cry. The boy looked at his father and made a soft chirping sound, the kind of sound Lycan pups make when they recognize their own pack. Kale's jaw tightened. He reached for the girl. He took her too. Now both pups were against his chest, and Wren's hands were empty, and the only thing between the king and the woman he had banished was 3 years of cold air. He looked at her. He said one word. Wife. The hall lost its mind. Believe me. They lost their minds. Lady Sable screamed something about the law. A council elder shouted about precedent. The captain of the guard barked an order, then unbarked it, then barked it again. The king did not move. He stayed on one knee with his pups against his chest, and his eyes on the kneeling mute woman in front of him. Wren finally lifted her head. She finally let herself look at him. He saw her face, the hollows under her eyes, the scar across the side of her neck, the way her mouth would not close all the way anymore because of what they had done to her throat. He flinched. He actually flinched. The Alpha King of the Lycan court flinched at the face of the woman he had thrown away. Then he set his jaw. Then he stood up. Then he turned to the court. Then he said one sentence, and that sentence broke the world. He said the order 3 winters ago had been a lie. The pups in his arms were proof. And whoever had given him that lie was going to answer for it. Tonight, in this hall, by his hand, Lady Sable went very, very still. The court went very, very quiet. Outside, the storm threw itself against the windows like a thing trying to get in. Wren stayed on her knees. She lowered her head again. Not in shame. In waiting. She could afford to wait now. The hall was finally listening. For a long stretch the hall did nothing. The king set the pups down gently into the arms of an old nurse who had served the royal nursery for 40 years. The nurse cried without sound. The king did not look at his sister. He did not look at the council. He walked to a side table where a pitcher of water sat. He poured a cup. He drank it. He set the cup down. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He stood there a moment breathing, his shoulders moving slow. Ren watched him from the corner of her eye. He looked for a heartbeat like any other man. A tired man in a quiet hall after a long bad day. Sable used that heartbeat. She moved her hand down the side of her gown. She drew a thin silver blade from a hidden sheath. She lunged. Ren saw the flash of the blade before the king did. She did not have a voice to shout. She used what she had. She threw herself forward across the stones, between her mate and the knife, both arms up. The blade went into her shoulder. It went deep. It scraped bone. The pain was a white sheet across her vision. She did not make a sound. She could not make a sound. But the blade was stopped, and it was stopped in her, not in him. The hall finally caught up. Guards moved. The king moved faster. He caught Sable by the wrist before she could pull the knife back. He twisted. Bone cracked. Sable went down screaming. The knife came out of Ren's shoulder with a wet sound. Ren stayed on her hands and knees on the stones. Blood spread under her in a slow circle. She kept her head down. She did not want the pups to see. The nurse had already turned the small bodies away into the corner. Smart nurse. The king dropped Sable to the floor without looking at her and went to Ren. He went down again, both knees this time. He pressed his palm hard against the wound. His hand was hot. Hers was cold. He said her name. He said it the way a man says a prayer he has not said in years. Ren tried to smile. Her mouth did not work right anymore, but she tried. He saw her try. He almost broke. He did not break. He turned his head and snapped an order for the healer. He turned his head and snapped an order for the guards. He turned his head and snapped an order for the council. 3 orders. All at once. The hall obeyed all 3. The captain dragged Sable up by her broken wrist. Sable spat at the king. She said the throne would be hers anyway. She said Ren was nothing. She said the pups would never be safe. The king did not look at her. He kept his hand on the wound on Ren's shoulder. He said into the room very softly that anyone who had helped his sister 3 winters ago had until sunrise to walk to the foot of the dais and confess. After sunrise, his patience ended. The hall did not breathe. 2 men in council, robes turned the color of wet plaster. One of them stepped forward immediately. The other one tried to back toward the door and found a guard's hand on his collar. 3 winters of lies started cracking open in real time. Ren listened to the cracking with her cheek almost on the stone. She felt her mate's hand on her shoulder. She felt the warmth of his palm. She felt for the first time in 3 winters like a person and not a ghost. If you have made it this far with me, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want the rest of these. There is more, and the rest of this one is the part I came to tell you. Stay close. The healer was an old woman with white braids and hands like roots. She knelt on the bloody stones next to the king and went to work without permission. She cut Ren's tunic open at the shoulder. She poured something clear and burning into the wound. Ren's body jerked once. The king held her down with one hand on her good shoulder and one hand stroking the back of her head, slow, the way you calm a frightened animal. The healer pressed cloth into the cut, then a poultice, then more cloth, then a binding. Through all of it, Ren did not make a sound, and not because she could not. Because she would not. She had learned in 3 winters of cliffs and ice, and a cave with 2 pups and no fire, that a sound was a thing you could choose to keep. The king saw her choose. He understood. He bent his head down close to her ear and whispered something only she could hear. He said he was sorry. He said it twice. Then he said it a third time. Then he stopped saying it, because words were not going to be enough, and he was not the kind of man to pretend they were. While the healer worked, the council was hauled into the center of the floor. The first man, the one who had stepped forward fast, was a thin tax officer named Halden. He was crying before anyone asked him a question. He said Lady Sable had paid him in gold 3 winters ago to forge a letter. A letter from Wren to a rival pack. A letter promising to deliver the king's plans in exchange for safe passage. He had written it. He had signed it in a hand close to Wren's. He had slipped it into the king's private chest. He had been paid. He had spent the gold. He was sorry. He was so sorry. The king did not look at him. The king kept his hand on Wren's head. He told the captain to take Halden to a cell. Not the dungeon. A cell. A cell with a bed and a window. Because Halden had walked forward on his own feet, and the king had given his word that a confession before sunrise would be remembered. The captain nodded and took the crying man away. The second man, the one with the guard's hand on his collar, was a council elder named Rorik. He was not crying. He was furious. He said Sable was the rightful heir. He said the king had ruined the bloodline by mating a mute foreign Omega. He said Wren had bewitched the king with her silence and her cliff magic and her stolen pups. The hall waited for the king to react. The king did not. The king looked at the old man for a long second and then said one sentence. He said Rorik had until sunrise to confess what he had done, or sunrise would come for him anyway. Rorik went quiet. He was led to the side. The hall kept cracking. A second council elder stepped forward on his own. Then a third. By the time the healer tied the last knot in Wren's binding, 4 men and 1 woman had confessed to a piece of the lie. They had forged signatures. They had bribed 2 guards on the cliff. They had paid an executioner extra to cut deep when he cut Wren's tongue, so that even if she lived, she would never be able to speak her own defense. That last one was the one that finally moved the king. He went still in a different way. His hand on Wren's head trembled once. He breathed in. He breathed out. He breathed in again. He took a long moment to make sure his voice would come out level. It did not quite, but it came out. He asked the woman who had paid the executioner extra to step forward. She did. She was a younger noblewoman with red hair and a tight, scared mouth. She had been Sable's friend since they were girls. The king looked at her for a long second. He did not raise his voice. He asked her if she had children of her own. She nodded. He asked her to think about her own children carrying their first words home from the nurse, and to think about what it would have meant to her if someone had taken those first words away. The woman started crying. The king did not soften. He said she would be taken from the hall and held with the others until the council decided. The captain led her out. The woman did not fight. She went the way a person goes when they finally understand what they have done. Then he stood up. Sable was still on the floor with her broken wrist clutched against her chest. The king walked to her. The hall held its breath again. He did not draw a blade. He did not raise a hand. He looked down at his own sister and asked her one question. He asked her why. Sable laughed, a short, sharp laugh, the same laugh as before. She said because their father had promised the throne to her first and given it to him because she was a daughter. She said because Wren was a stranger from a small pack with no name and no family to defend her. She said because it was easy. Then she said the part that broke the hall in 2. She said the pups were not even his. She said the pups had been fathered by a guard on the cliffs during the banishment. She said Wren was a whore and the king was a fool. Wren on the stones lifted her head. Slowly, with the bandage tight across her shoulder, with blood drying on her chin from where she had bitten her lip during the healing. She looked at the king. She shook her head once. Just once. Side to side. Slow. No. The king looked back at her. He did not need her to speak. He had already smelled the truth on the pups the moment he stepped off the dais. He turned to his sister. He said very softly that lying once had cost her the court. Lying twice had cost her the family. Then he turned to the captain and gave the order. Sable was taken out of the hall in chains. She screamed the whole way. The doors closed behind her. The hall went quiet again. The king came back to Ren. He picked her up, just lifted her off the stones like she weighed nothing. He carried her up the steps of the dais. He sat down on the throne with her across his lap, her bandaged shoulder against his chest, her head under his chin. The nurse brought the pups. He took them too, all three of them against him on the throne. The hall stared. The king stared back. He said to the whole room that the woman in his arms was his queen. He said the pups were his heirs. He said anyone who wanted to question that could step forward now and say so to his face. No one stepped forward. The storm outside started to lose its temper. Inside, for the first time in 3 winters, the cold in the stone began slowly to back off. Dawn came in gray and shy. The storm had blown itself out somewhere over the mountains. The hall was empty except for guards by the doors, the old nurse in a chair by the hearth, the 2 pups asleep in a wooden cradle, and the king and his queen on the throne. Ren had slept a little. Not much. Pain kept waking her. So did disbelief. Every time she opened her eyes, she expected to be back in the cave on the cliffs, alone with 2 hungry pups and a fire she could not keep lit. Every time she opened her eyes, the king was still there, one arm around her, the other hand resting on the cradle to keep it rocking. Around mid-morning, a steward came in with a stack of papers. He spoke quietly. The king listened. The steward read out the names of the 7 people who had confessed before sunrise. The king nodded. He read out 3 more names, ones the king did not know, of people who had taken bribes from Sable and not come forward. The king nodded again. He gave instructions. Confessors would be exiled, not killed, to a farming village in the north where they would work the fields under watch for the rest of their lives. The 3 who had not confessed would be tried by the council and judged. The 2 cliff guards who had been paid to look away would be sent to the wall. Sable would be held in the south tower until the council agreed on her fate, and the king would not be the one to vote. He said that last part himself. He said he did not trust his own anger. He said the law was bigger than his blood. Ren listened with her eyes closed. She liked the way he said it. The steward left. The hall was quiet again. The nurse hummed a low tune to the pups. The king turned his face down toward Ren's hair. He said very softly that he had something to tell her. He said it would not undo 3 winters. He said he knew that. He said he wanted to tell her anyway. Ren opened her eyes. She nodded once. He talked. He told her about the morning after he had signed her banishment order. He told her how he had not been able to eat for 9 days. He told her how he had ridden out to the cliffs 3 different times in the first winter and turned back each time because his own pride would not let him admit he had been wrong. He told her how, in the second winter, he had stopped sleeping in their old room. He told her how, by the 3rd winter, he had stopped speaking at meals. He told her that the day before she walked back through the gate, he had decided he was going to abdicate. He had written the letter. It was in a drawer in his chambers. He was going to give the throne to a cousin and ride out to the cliffs himself, not to bring her back, because he believed she was dead, but to walk off the same cliff she had been thrown from. He said it without drama. He said it the way a man reads off a list. Ren listened. She did not cry. She had stopped crying somewhere in the 2nd winter. But she reached up with her good hand and put her palm flat against his jaw. She held it there. He closed his eyes. The hall stayed quiet. Around noon, the council came back. They stood at the foot of the dais in a careful line. The senior elder spoke. He acknowledged, on behalf of the council, that they had been deceived 3 winters ago. He acknowledged that the queen had been wronged. He acknowledged that the pups were the lawful heirs. He asked, on behalf of the council, what the queen wished done. Wren looked at him. She looked at the king. She looked at the cradle. Then she did something that surprised everyone in the hall, including herself. She slid off the king's lap, slowly, careful of her shoulder. She walked down the dais on her own 2 feet. She walked to the senior elder. She looked him in the eye. She lifted one hand. She made a sign, the old sign, the sign every Lycan child learns before they can talk. Mercy. The elder swallowed. He bowed. The council bowed with him. They turned and left to carry that one sign into their judgment. The king watched her from the throne with something on his face that the nurse, watching from her chair, would later describe to her grandchildren as the look of a man who has finally understood his own wife. Wren came back up the steps. She sat down beside him on the throne. Not on his lap this time. Beside him. Her own seat. Her own weight on the stone. Her own queen's place. The pups slept on. The hall slowly began to warm. People came and went. Servants brought bread and broth. The healer came back to check the binding. Outside, a clear winter sun finally cut through the clouds and threw a long pale square of light across the floor of the hall. Wren watched the square of light move. She thought about the cave on the cliffs. She thought about the 2 small bundles she had carried 9 days through snow. She thought about the moment she had decided, after the second pup was born, that she was not going to die out there and let the lie win. She thought about the steward's face when she walked in. She thought about Sable's laugh. She thought about her mate kneeling on the stones with her babies in his arms. She thought about the night the boy had been born in the cave, in the dark, with no one to help her but a half-blind wolf who had wandered in out of the snow and laid down at her feet like an old guard dog. She thought about the night the girl had been born, 11 minutes after the boy, smaller, quieter, but with the same hard grip in her tiny hand. She thought about the cord she had cut with a sharpened flat stone. She thought about the milk she had pulled from her own body in the cold. She thought about how, on the worst night of the worst winter, she had almost laid the pups down in the snow and walked away. She had not. She had picked them up. She had held them inside her cloak. She had stayed alive 1 more hour, then 1 more hour, then 1 more. That was how 3 winters got built. 1 more hour, 1 more hour, 1 more. Then she stopped thinking and just sat. Quiet was a thing she had learned. Quiet was a thing she owned. For the first time in 3 winters, the quiet was not a punishment. It was a place to rest. Late in the afternoon, the king turned to her and said one more thing. He said he was not going to ask her to forgive him. He said he knew better than to ask. He said he was going to spend the rest of his life earning the chance to ask. Wren looked at him a long moment. Then she lifted her hand and made another sign, a smaller one, a private one, the sign mates use between themselves. Stay. He stayed. He stayed beside her on the throne until the pups woke. He stayed beside her when the nurse brought the pups over to be fed. He stayed beside her through the long blue dusk and into the first quiet evening of the rest of their lives. Servants lit the wall sconces 1 by 1. The light caught the silver collars of the new guards, who had been pulled up from the lower barracks to replace the men sent to the wall. The boy pup yawned in the nurse's lap. The girl pup grabbed a fistful of Wren's hair and did not let go. Wren smiled. It was a small smile, the kind of face has to learn again after 3 winters of not smiling, but it was a smile. The king saw it. He did not say anything. He just put his hand over hers on the arm of the throne. The captain came in once, near full dark, to report that Sable was secured in the South Tower and the confessors were on the road north under guard. The king nodded. He did not ask for details. He told the captain to take an hour's rest. The captain bowed and left. Outside, a clear sky filled with hard winter stars. Inside, a fire built itself higher in the great hearth. Wren leaned her head carefully against her mate's shoulder. He turned his face into her hair. The pups slept, and the hall, which had been cold for 3 winters, finally, slowly, began to remember what warm felt like.